Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Most certainly watching the unemployment rate is important, but the education policy cry from business is and has been the lack of finding the right talent for jobs available. Our most important businesses and leaders say we are at a major tipping point for this issue, and it's more than workforce development. It goes even further back into primary and secondary education. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy for almost 25 years now. As we attempt to do each week, we will dive into those issues, certainly education and related matters. And later on, we meet the UNC System Board of Governors Chair, John Fennebresque.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, John Hood, president of the John William Pope Foundation, Andy Brack, publisher of Statehouse Report, and special guest John C. Fennebresque, chairman of the UNC Board of Governors. And now, here's Chris Williams.
Hello, welcome to our program. Andy, John, good to have you both here.
Thank you.
Welcome
Thanks.
back. You know, John, there has been this ongoing dialogue, and it's happened over years, but it's come back now into vogue, if you will, as being one of the issues, and that's this issue. And I'm not saying it's not, but my question about the urban versus rural divide, and it's not a new phenomenon. My question is this: is it a phenomenon, and is it more critical than it was before?
Well, I wish you'd ask me an easier question. It's a challenging one. If people had figured out the answer to the urban-rural split in any state, North Carolina, South Carolina, or anywhere else, if they knew the answer, then we wouldn't have been grappling with this issue for so many decades. My observation over the years has been the issue rises to the forefront when the economy is growing. In other words, when the Great Recession hits in 2007, pretty much everybody goes south. And so it's not so much why are they doing better than we are, but why are we all doing so poorly? When you have a recovery, and in particular you look at a state like North Carolina, the Charlotte area, the Research Triangle, Raleigh-Durham area are doing fairly well. And that creates more of a gap with communities that everybody went down, but they're not coming back as quickly. In addition to that, you have changes in the political leadership where you have some legislators now in North Carolina who are in significant positions of authority who do represent areas that are not growing as rapidly as the rest of the state. And so that it's personal, it's local to them, and that helps to explain it.
But is there any other General Assembly in any other state that hasn't faced this?
Of course, it happens everywhere. And in fact, human beings have been moving from farms to cities roughly since, ancient Mesopotamia. Yeah. So there's nothing new about this. Yeah. But it used to be that more rural areas in the Carolinas had a lot of opportunities to do textiles, furniture, apparel, other products, export. A lot of that has changed. We all know why it's changed, a variety of factors, both automation and trade. And so it creates more challenges for rural areas, perhaps, than we saw even in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, Andy, a different take on this for South Carolina?
South Carolina has a definite urban-rural gap. I think it's caused politically and economically. Politically, the metro areas, through gerrymandering, now run the legislature. Greenville, Charleston, and Columbia are where the centers of power in the state are. Economically, the rural areas have relatively low tax bases but high tax rates. And so people are taxed way more there, but they don't get as big a bang for their buck as they do in the urban areas. So that there is a huge challenge to provide basic services like really good education, transportation, and the like. There are counties like Allendale County where there's one grocery store in the whole county, where there's literally no place to eat in the county other than at the hospital in the cafeteria. You don't have business lunches at the Hardee's generally. So, I mean, there are challenges there, and I don't see it changing anytime soon until the legislature understands better that investment needs to happen in these rural areas as well as in the urban areas where they're bringing Boeing and Volvo and BMW and the tire companies.
So you've queued up a couple things for us, and that is you use the term investment. You also use the two terms, transportation and education. John, you know, at the taping of this program, we have no idea what the General Assembly is going to do next week, let alone when this program airs. So I'm not going to ask you to speculate on that. But transportation and education seem to be running neck and neck as the two top priorities for North Carolina. How do we tweeze out, or maybe better asked, how do we think differently about prioritizing these two and or funding these two?
Well, with transportation in particular, the phenomenon that I've experienced over 25 years in North Carolina is I've been to all 100 counties at some point. Every single one of them is absolutely convinced that they're funded below average, which of course is mathematically impossible. Urban areas, suburban areas that are growing say we don't get an adequate amount of money to handle all the traffic we're getting. So because we have so much traffic, we deserve more money. In rural areas, they say because we don't have any traffic, we deserve more money. In other words, we need better roads so we can attract more people and more industry and more commercial, more retail, and therefore have more traffic. Now, you got to choose between these. You can't say yes to both arguments because they're contradictory. So one of the things the legislature is going to do and has done already, because it's pretty obvious that both chambers are in favor, is put more money into transportation by ending a long-time transfer of highway funds, of gas tax and car tax money that was going to pay for things like the highway patrol, is instead going to go into pavement and into resurfacing. Not all new construction, a combination of new and resurfacing and improvement of our existing roadways. That money is going to be spent in rural as well as urban areas. But they did make a change in the formula. It is focused more on traffic and more on economic development. So that has some implications. Some counties got more out of that, including rural ones, and others, including other rural ones, got less.
So Governor McCrory was a lead on the new funding formula
Absolutely.
for transportation.
It didn't get as much attention as it deserved. It was a huge, heavy lift, and ended up passing both chambers easily in 2013.
Yeah, Andy, so South Carolina, session's been over for a while. Speaker Lucas said it was going to be a priority for transportation. Turns out not much happened at all about transportation. How punitive is this for the Palmetto State, and when do you hit a tipping point for economic development without addressing this priority?
You can't drive down I-95 now without hitting a pothole all the time. And I think that if the legislature doesn't get off the dime and address the $1 trillion needs that we have in roads, it's going to be devastating for economic development. I mean, our education system already has some questionable problems that were ranked pretty low. The transportation system is the artery that the trucks use to get from the Port of Charleston in and out of there to ship materials all over the country. So we've got to have improvements to the road, and quite frankly, it's not rocket science what has to be done in South Carolina. The people by a 70% margin don't have a problem with raising the gas tax, which is among the lowest in the nation.
But it's not just the gas tax. What else is keeping that from happening?
It's recalcitrance on the legislature. That's about all it is. They're not facing the problem full on and taking it as seriously as they can. There's a number of challenges in South Carolina, and they can't get their arms wrapped around. I've always thought that the thing that's wrong about state government compared to businesses is that there's not a strategic plan. They come into session every session and just handle whatever the hot button issues or try to that year, but they don't think long term. And that's the kind of planning that we're going to have if we're going to be able to deal with education and health care and roads.
Yeah, okay, thanks. In about 30 seconds, you just got back from Cuba.
I did.
This is a brand new dialogue after more than a half a century normalizing relations between the United States and Cuba. What struck you most about this trip?
Number one, they're not ready for prime time, and they're not ready for America in a lot of ways, but they know it, and they're starting to do the kinds of things to be more accessible to tourists. The biggest problem that I think that they have is they have to be able to figure out how people can make phone calls and get on the internet. It took me 4 days to figure out how to make a phone call.
Wow.
So, I mean, it is a fascinating country. They're not the boogeyman that we've all been, in my generation, been led to believe. The people are accessible to Americans and are very generous and kind, but they've got some infrastructure investments to make so that American tourists will feel more comfortable over there and get an experience. It's weird seeing all those 50s cars and no billboards that say only Viva la Revolucion. Yeah. I mean, there's no billboards, and there's no trash.
And knowing they're not just trying to be retro, but that really is their mode of transportation. And John, it's got to make us feel better about the urban-rural divide when we compare what, kind of the Stone Age.
We have significant problems of poverty in North and South Carolina, but by worldwide standards, we're not even in the same situation.
Guys, thank you. We'll bring our guest on in just a second here. Next week on this program, she is the fairly newly minted president of Furman University. She will be here. Dr. Elizabeth Davis joins us about not just the direction of that higher ed in the state of South Carolina, but her take on education in the Palmetto State. And then in 2 weeks, Mikey Johnson is the chairman of the State Board of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, but also runs a company called Cox Industries that has something to do with exporting and business development. Mikey Johnson joins us in a couple weeks. It may sound profane, but there's almost too much press and media around education coverage in North Carolina. Too much because it becomes highly charged and politically embattled to the point that the issues that matter most tend to be eclipsed by politics and hyperbole. It seems that not all, but enough of the dialogue about the direction of the UNC system in particular and the intent of Republican-controlled General Assembly is opaque and unsettled. In the interest of clarity, what is the vision of the leadership in the UNC system? And more broadly, what is the real value of a liberal arts education? Important questions. Joining us now is the chairman of the UNC Board of Governors, Charlotte Attorney John Fennebresque. Mr. Chairman, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Let's start with a vision, Mr. Chairman. As you see it now, you've got a president search going on for the UNC system. You've got a fairly new Board of Governors. How would you articulate what the vision for the UNC system is in the committee meetings and in the meetings that you chair?
It's dealing with change. Change is hitting higher education daily, whether it's technology, whether it's demographics, and we know it's financial. So, for example, North Carolina has a constitutional provision that says free as practicable higher education. Well, free as practicable, lawyers have made billions of dollars of that for hundreds of years and still haven't figured it out. So tuition, for example, at our university has gone up 54% in the last 6 years. It's getting less and less free as practicable. Mm-hmm. We have the fourth most generous General Assembly at $2.5 billion of a $9.3 billion budget for us, and yet there's been cuts and cuts that have hurt. And what I view part of our job is showing the General Assembly where we are making education more efficient and showing them that it is a great investment. It's the most important institution the citizens of this state own. The UNC system is a pathway to prosperity for North Carolina. And the people on the board with me know that mm-hmm. and are trying to persuade others in positions of power that that is true. And I think we're succeeding.
Where did the rhetoric come from? How did the state General Assembly, Board of Governors, I'm not even sure what it is.
There is a difference. They're political. We're not.
Yeah. Well, good distinction. Where did the reputation come from that Republicans in North Carolina are waging a war on education?
I would guess the liberal media, mainstream media, because it's not true. I can only speak for the Board of Governors. And you look at the General Assembly, where's their money go? It goes to education. Now, what they may have done is cut taxes too far, too fast. Mm-hmm. I've had an argument with some of them about that. I'm in the minority with the people in the General Assembly. Government has a role, an important role, the important role in education. I think K through 12 has gotten a lot of attention and conversation. Higher ed, not so much. Now, we are treated well by the General Assembly. I want us to be treated better, and I want to prove to the General Assembly those investment dollars are the best dollars they spend. So I actually don't find our elected officials anti-education at all. They appropriately say, show us that you're efficient and not wasting tax dollars. That's fair. Mm-hmm. We're trying to do that. We're succeeding. We've got a ways to go. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe that those 170 people in Raleigh and however many people help the governor with what he does, they are not, the Republicans or the Democrats are not anti-education. They're just not.
John.
Speaking of the issue of the university system playing a role in the economic development in North Carolina, over the years there's been some criticism of the relationship between the university system on the one hand and the community college system on the other hand. And as you know, in recent years there's been an attempt to harmonize, in fact create some agreements so students can attend community college and more easily have their credits transfer when they proceed. If
we
they
have done
want to.
that.
You've already done that. They just did a similar deal with the private colleges. What other steps should be taken to coordinate or compare notes or better sort of work through the governance of these two higher education systems?
Well, the interesting thing is both are searching for new leaders as we speak. I think that is a great opportunity because the coincidence and concurrence of that is have more communication and better communication with the CEOs of both those operations. We think very much of the community college system because it's great. It's a great system. We have a great system. What we tried to do with our agreement is make it easier for the community college students to come to our universities and have their credits count and have apples and apples instead of apples and oranges and make it coherent for the community colleges students to come to our campuses. And I think we're doing that.
Andy?
I'm perplexed by your answer about the vision because you sound like a Terry Sanford acolyte. Terry Sanford being the fellow that says we need to invest to be able to get in jobs. And then you say that the University Board of Governors isn't political, but I think when you look at the fact that the Board of Governors now is Republican versus Democrat, and the fellow who is the leader still of the university system, Tom Ross, is a Democrat, and the Republicans got rid of him. For you to say that the university system is not political is a bunch of hooey, and most people don't buy it. You've danced around the answer of why did you fire Tom Ross when he was doing a pretty good job, a good enough job so that you gave him a raise for a year. But why did you get rid of him? It looks political.
Well, it's not political. And you're wrong, and you obviously just read the Charlotte Observer and the Raleigh News and Observer. It's not. People do not take their party affiliation into the Board of Governors. They just don't do it.
Despite all the little emails you got saying, high five, John, you did a great job. We need one of ours leading the state university education system.
That was all after I talked to Tom Ross. After I talked to none of those people before. It was a solid majority of people that wanted to get the opportunity to choose their own president and get on the same page with that president. There had been a great deal of turnover, so for years and years, the Democrats controlled the General Assembly, right? And the Democrats appointed Democrats primarily to be on the Board of Governors. Although even when the Democrats appointed Democrats, I don't believe there was a lot of politics at the Board of Governors. I don't. It's not a partisan body. And so whenever it was, 5 years ago, when Republicans got a majority in the two houses, 3 years ago, I can't remember, they, over a period of time, appointed mostly Republicans. I think it's the same with mostly Republicans in terms of the structure as it was when it was mostly Democrats. I actually believe most people of either party that are appointed to the Board of Governors actually have a passion for education, because frankly, I don't care that much about politics, and I would not spend 200 hours of my time, 200 hours a month as chair of the UNC Board of Governors if it was politics. I wouldn't.
John, one of the things you just brought up, and this is, somebody called this a bubble in this economy, and that is the cost of college and the debt level of college. You also talked about the constitutionality in North Carolina saying that we want, and I'm not going to say it right, but to paraphrase, that North Carolina wants to keep that cost as practically low as possible. Even with those pressures, the cost of higher ed has gotten higher and higher. What can, not just the Board of Governors do about it, but how can we think differently about funding what clearly is very important to the development of the state and the region?
It's crucial, and you've hit on it. The current system of funding is not sustainable. Tax dollars are going to be harder and harder to come by. We have to come up with a model that is more privately funded and more philanthropy. Every graduation I speak to at the UNC System, the campuses, I say to the class, you've got to give. You've got to support your alma mater. And I say, give $5 today. It's a good habit to get in. It's remarkably uneven throughout the system. All the schools have these active, loud alumni. It's remarkable how many of the active, loud alumni don't give. I find that troubling.
How much would that add? How much of the burden would that take fiscally off of these raises that we see year over year?
A lot. I mean, you have to build that. I mean, for example, the big schools, or the oldest schools, like Chapel Hill and NC State, have very well-run advancement teams, and they raise money, and they're good at it. A lot of the other schools are either new at it or don't do it. And we are trying to consolidate some of that at General Administration to help some of the smaller schools be able to learn how to raise money and make it a priority. But the current model, you've got $1.2 trillion of student debt. That just is not working. The default rate is going off the charts. The other statistic that surprised me when I got into this was how low the 6-year graduation rate was. So people say, what are you talking about, 6-year graduation? I thought you went to school for 4 years. I'm showing my age. When I went to school, it was 4 years. You have different demographics. You have many older students now that may have come back to school. But what I think the schools can do better is get the kids through there faster. 60% over 6 years. That means you have 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and nationally, 60% graduation rate over 6 years. That's a problem. And if you can shorten that, and most of our campuses are about 9 semesters, so 4.5 years. That reduces borrowing, and it also creates more turnover so that the new kids, the high school seniors, can get in those desks, the college desks, sooner.
Yep. Okay, that's going to have to be the last word. And I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to use the word hooey. I like that word. I haven't heard that in a while. But it's nice of you to bring it up. John, thanks for being on the program.
You're welcome.
Best of luck going forward.
Yeah, I got a lot of passion about this.
I can tell. And not an easy job. You're going to need every bit of it. Thank you. Good to see you. Andy, welcome back.
Thank you.
John, good to have you on the program.
Thank you.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.